MessianTics Podcast, a podcast about all things Messianic Judaism. Each episode, we will be sharing our opinions as we tackle some of the biggest issues in Messianic Judaism. Now, here's your hosts, Rabbis Eric, David, Jonathan, and Toby.
Rabbi Eric here, along with Rabbi John, Rabbi Toby, and Rabbi David, and we're going to have a discussion today that I hope will be an encouragement and a blessing to all of you out there, especially those of you with children. And that is, my children are all both grown now. They have children of their own. But all the rabbis sitting at the table with me all have smaller children or teens. And we wanted to have a discussion of how do you raise your children in and with Messianic Jewish values, Messianic Jewish beliefs. What tools, what mechanisms, what things do you do? Are there things you keep them from or towards? Do you read your Bible with them every night? Do you pray with them? Do they, all of the different things. So I just want to kick it out to you because I know we have a lot of young parents that are listening that are wondering, how do I do this? How do I raise my children in the fear and admonition, so to speak, and in a Messianic Jewish context? What resources do you have that you use to teach and guide your children? So I'm going to start out by throwing it to Rabbi Toby and let him start off, and then, like I said, there's all kinds of, there's internet stuff now, there's stuff that wasn't available when my children were small. But how do you live the life into your children?
Outside of obviously synagogue life, which my son is my son is 10, and my daughter is 7. She'll be 8 in a few months, so 10 and 8.
Excuse me.
And so 10 years old, 8 years old. My son's 10. My daughter's 8. The outside of synagogue life, which is attending services at the synagogue on Saturday, when my son was old enough to begin a S3E9 school, which he was old enough as soon as it came out. A S3E9 school is online distance learning Hebrew school. It's supported. It's very well supported by the UMJC, but it's its own entity. The S3E9 school. And it teaches not just Hebrew but also Judaism and the Bible from a Messianic perspective. It's open to Jewish and non-Jewish kids. My son started that when he was 8, and he's in his 3rd year. And so that's one thing we do. That is, it was twice a week, every Wednesday and Sunday he would attend class, and then now it's every Sunday as he's gotten into the 3rd year. Because we wanted him to have a Hebrew Jewish education.
Now, how long does that class? Is it an hour? 2 hours?
It's like a little over an hour because it's once a week. When it was twice a week, it was 50 minutes.
And they log in with a group of people, or is it individual education?
Usually has like 8 to 10 kids per class.
Okay. So
small. So far he's had 2 teachers. They're fantastic. We personally know the person who runs the school, who's the head of the school, and she's, the real deal. She's legit. And S3E9, ASHREINU. And make sure you find the right S3E9 school, the one that's Messianic and all that. And, but I can tell you, it's that they're very serious. It's not just fun kid stuff, activities, coloring book stuff. They're learning. It's challenging, which I like when it's a little tough for my son. That's good. Anything should be. So that's probably the first thing.
Now, does he like it? I know you like it because I can hear in your voice that you like it. But is he enjoying the class? Is it something that he looks forward to going to each week?
Yeah, most of the time, yeah. Sometimes he's like, like any kid is with school.
Right.
But
overall, it's positive to him.
Overall, it's positive, yes. Especially even when he has days where he's like, "Oh, Dad," once he sits down, he loves his teacher and he loves talking to the other kids. He likes to talk about himself, most kids do, and that's fine. But so he's learning that, and of course, so I'm just talking about my son right now. Now there is one for my daughter was 7, and she could have joined their GAN class, GAN, GAN. But we felt that she wasn't quite ready. So we'll probably start her next year in the Aleph class, because that's like kind of the grades they have: Aleph, certain age; Bet, certain age; Gimel. I think it goes all the way up to Dalet, and then they have a curriculum for kids in their teens, like post bar bat mitzvah. So that's what he's doing. My son, my daughter, we're preparing to transfer her in that, and then of course my son next summer, he'll be 11, and he'll start in our congregation at CMC's B'nai Mitzvah program. So that outside of, again, just attending now daily, because it can't just be, I'm going to stick you in Hebrew school and I'm going to put you in this B'nai Mitzvah program and you will show up to Shabbat school or Shabbat services. There's also what my wife and I do every day. Every night before he goes to bed, him and my daughter, we say the Aaronic blessing and the Shema. And I have also noticed when I, during liturgy and during the standing prayers at the synagogue, that he knows them. He's very shy and to do things like that in front of people, but he's clearly learning. He can finish the Shema when I say it at night. He can't go to bed, and my daughter, it's the same way. I'm saying just he, but she as well. They can't go to sleep without receiving a blessing. We say, again, the number 6 Aaronic blessing. And that's, I tell people all the time at the synagogue, I said, I don't care if your son and daughter or your kids are, if they're 6 months old, 6 minutes old, 60 years old, say that blessing over them. Call your adult child before they go to bed. Or call them in the evening and just say that blessing. It's the one blessing that God said, say this and I'll bless, right? And we have Shabbat at home on Friday nights, and Brooke bakes bread, and sometimes we draw it out, sometimes it's short and kind of expressed depending on what's going on. But so I think that's the best place to start. I think the best place to start is the Aaronic blessing and the Shema, or you could say the bedtime Shema every morning, or every night before they go to bed. You could say the Modeh Ani when they wake up. But let's start with something that everyone knows, the Aaronic blessing from Numbers chapter 6. The Lord bless you, keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you. Do that every night before they go to bed. I guarantee you do that every night before they go to bed. And they will start asking for it. And that, I just know, fills the heart of God. He's like, I love that. I love that they want that blessing, because God wants to bless. So,
and one of the things I wanted to interject here, and then
sure.
we'll jump to David, is that nothing that you've said so far was something that you're doing because you're a rabbi. In other words, anybody listening to this program right now who's not a rabbi, doesn't have a leadership, isn't, all the things you just mentioned is something that they could do with their children or get their children involved in without having to be that. So because sometimes people think, well, you're a rabbi, so you do this.
No, right. Well, and I think that you raise a good point. I think we should have another episode on this, actually what calling means, because I think sometimes we get into this mindset that there's people in clergy, like rabbis and such, it's incumbent upon them to do it. And I'm like, no, actually the Bible is very clear about what you're called to do. Pray ceaselessly, pray ceaselessly, give thanks always, walk humbly, love justice. Every person is called to do that. We can't always get our calling wrapped up in these things that we do.
Right.
But for me, it's daily blessing at night, weekly Shabbat. And again, like you said, people might look at me because I'm a rabbi and say, well, you know how to do that. I remember like it was yesterday, the first time I ever did Shabbat. I literally called my mom up. I was living with my mom at the time. It was before I met my wife and all those things. And we had been going to a Messianic synagogue for maybe a year. And I called her up and said, that's it. We need to have Shabbat. I'm stopping and grabbing a bottle of wine on the way home, or grape juice is fine. And I'm getting a loaf of bread. It doesn't have to be challah bread. Get a French loaf. It doesn't matter. But I was going to get that wine and I was going to get that bread, and we brought it home. And let me tell you what happened after that, people. After that, we went from not having Shabbat to having Shabbat every Friday night at the dinner table to having dinner almost every night of the week at the table, which we had never done. And that's what God does. And that's the Spirit of God. And he honored that. and we didn't know half of what we were doing. We just knew to say the Vashamru or the Shema, or maybe you don't know that. But man, grab the bread, grab the wine, get your family around the table, and just start with blessing the Lord and thanking Him, and lighting the and then move on to lighting the candles. Then move on to how can do you know how difficult it's been for me and Brooke to have, every married couple argues and bickers sometimes. How hard is that to do when on Friday evening you're going to lay your hand on your wife and say, a woman of valor who can find it diffuses and disarms that.
Yeah, and again, the point I was making, which you made really well, is that as people are listening to this, you started doing Shabbat.
Yes, the first thing
before you became a rabbi, before you were in ministry, before. So the point is that if you have children and you're not a rabbi, you're not a worship leader, you're not a Shabbat school teacher, having Shabbat, getting your kids involved in Messianic education like a Shrenu or those things, that's not something beyond your ability or expectations. You can do these simple things with your family. So absolutely. Rabbi David, your children are a little older than Rabbi Toby's. So why don't you share what you do? And I want to try to, at least by the time we get to Rabbi Jonathan, not only discuss the educational things like the Ashrenu and Shabbat school and stuff, but the different modalities of teaching and using other things like art and things, because I know you guys are all artistic, you're all talented in different ways also.
Yeah, and I just want to say before we move forward is that make sure after we all discuss what we do to talk about some resources that will help you get started.
Absolutely.
Want to make sure we do that.
So a couple of things have always been extremely vital to my wife and I in terms of our kids. We made a decision early in our marriage that Messianic Judaism is our life. I grew up in it. She came to Messianic Judaism when she was in middle school, and we had long decided, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, this is never going to change. And because we both have a passion for raising up a future generation, not just with our own personal kids, but in general, it was a very easy mindset for us to kind of transition and think about with our own kids and how we were going to raise them. And so for us, much like with what Rabbi Toby was saying, is one of our biggest objectives has always been to instill the value of Shabbat into our children, and not just the weekly Shabbat, but the Moedim and so on. And I know that there may be those out there who have disagreements with us on this, and that's perfectly cool. Figure it out for yourself. For us, that even comes down to the activities we allow our kids to be involved with. If, for instance, if they want to be involved with sports or, like a communal sports or a park league or whatever, for us, it always came down to, we love this. We want you to be a part of it. But if your games are only on Saturdays, then we can't participate in it, because and it's not that I have an issue with people playing sports on Saturday or whatever else. For us, it came down to, we never want to raise our kids in a mentality where we are the ones sowing into them. There's a certain point where they're having to figure out life for themselves. But we want to set an example for our kids that nothing is more important than God's word. Nothing is more important than the Shabbat. And just as an example, though, yes, they weren't able to do a lot of things that they've wanted to do over the years specifically to that, but we have, and unfortunately it's because we live in an area that just doesn't offer a lot of alternatives. If we were still in New York, it wouldn't be that hard to find rec leagues that they could be a part of that don't play on Saturdays, because a lot more Jewish people than on the Gulf Coast of Alabama. But nonetheless, one of the things that we've witnessed over the years with that is, my daughter's 15 now, she'll be 16 in a few months, and she has her first job. She's working at a local coffee shop. The owners are friends of mine and what have you. So she's working at a local coffee shop. And one of the things that's really important to her is that she not work on Shabbat, that she makes sure she's taking off for the Moedim and so on. And that's, she knows our expectations in the household, but that's something she's very intentional about. And she'll even come to me if she gets scheduled on like a Friday afternoon or whatever. She'll, hey, is this going to work? Is this going to be too close to sundown? Is this going to be, and we'll sit down and look at it with her and help her figure it out and what have you. But it's been something she's intentionally looking for. Another thing we do very much like Rabbi Toby, talking about saying the priestly blessing over his children and all in the evenings. One of the things that we strive to do, and we're not always perfect on it, we probably miss a lot more than we hit, is that we try to do the bedtime Shema with our kids every night. Or at least most nights, which includes the Birchat Kohanim, the priestly blessing, and a few other things. And actually has a very beautiful messianic expectation in the closing of it. But we try to say the bedtime Shema with our children. I worked under Rabbi David Rosenberg for 5 years in New York as his rabbinic intern at Shiva Yisrael in Long Island. And one of the things that I took from him, just in hearing him talk about raising their kids and all, is one of the things he always talked about was he never wanted his kids to wake up or go to bed without seeing him in the Word. And so he would intentionally wake up earlier than the kids would wake up. So if they were going to school and they had to be up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get ready for school, he was up at 5 o'clock so that he could be up and alive and in the Word, so that when they came downstairs, they saw their dad at the table in the Bible, and it instilled that value into them and what have you. And so that's something that's always been a big thing for me with my kids, is I strive to, first thing in the morning, and again, don't always hit it dead on the nail, but I strive to, first thing in the morning, to dive in the Word and spend time in the Word. And my kids will wake up, and if I'm in a hurry to get out or whatever, they'll, hey, are you not going to read the Bible today? Or are you not going to, like, they hold me to it. They call me on it, which is kind of cool too. And so that's something that we strive to instill in them and to encourage them with. Likewise, my kids, I grew up as a rabbi's kid. And rabbis' kids kind of have a sucky life in a lot of ways, if we're honest about it. Same thing with pastors' kids, because number one, there's you have to be at everything because your parents are they're taking you, so you have to be at everything. Aside from having to be at everything, there's a lot of extra expectations from the congregation put on the rabbis' kids. Things that they would never expect out of their own kids, but for whatever reason, they mandatorily expect out of the rabbis' kids. And so we've worked very diligently to teach our kids that it's not their responsibility to hold up to other people's expectations like that, but also instilling in them the value and the necessity of being a servant and being willing to serve. And so our kids very actively serve in our congregation in various ways, not out of compulsion. We're not forcing them to. Now, there are a few times that my kids catch the somebody's not here to run slides, would you please be willing to do this? And they're like, yeah, cool. They'll get in there and do it. But they also serve on that side of things on a regular basis and what have you. But they willingly and voluntarily want to serve in different things and help with things, and which is kind of cool too. And my son generally will run around and say he wants to do one of two things. He wants to join the IDF when he graduates, and he wants to be a Messianic rabbi at some point himself, which is not something I've encouraged of him. If that happens, that's a God thing. I didn't want to do it myself because I know how much it sucks and how much people suck and what have you. But but God called me to it anyways. Now I've grown to love it, and my attitude has changed a lot on it. But I don't want to force my kid to want to do what I do. If it's something that God puts on his heart, then I'm all for it. But our big thing is instilling what we do, backing up what we do with action, not just talk, but backing up what we do with action and living that out before our kids and encouraging them to be active and participatory in the life.
Yeah. So I hear that when Rabbi Toby was talking, he talked about the educational opportunities. Mm-hmm. He talked about praying with his kids and blessing them. And then you went a step forward from that, and I believe Rabbi Toby would do the same thing. He just didn't mention it, and that's to live. Sometimes the best way to teach our children things and instill things in them is for them to see us doing it. So I know that you get up in the morning, because I see you post a verse from Scripture nearly every morning, and you go through a reading program. It's called Word is a Way of Life, correct?
Yeah, Word is a Way of Life.
Where it brings you through the entire Bible. How many times a year?
3 to 4 times a year. If you follow it to the T, you can shorten down the number of chapters that you read and make it a little longer 2 times. One.
But that's a great way of showing by example, so that your children will, wake up and say, okay. reading the Word every day, starting out my day is something that's part of who we are. I should maybe do this and make it a part of it. Okay, so Rabbi Jonathan, you have the youngest of the children in the group, and your son is...
He's 2.
Okay, and so what are you doing, what are you and Rebus and Catherine doing to instill in his young little mind the things of God and our faith?
Yeah, mostly just, keeping him involved with us and the things we do. So, whenever we do, things like Shabbat blessings, he's there. Like we don't let him wander off, with his toys in the corner. We're like, hey, it's time for this. Like you need to climb up in your booster seat, and it's time for this. And he loves it. And he's there to do it. So when it's time to bring out bread and wine, he'll even say that. He'll be like, bread, wine, and of course we mostly stick with juice nowadays, but it's to the point where even if I'm drinking actual wine at home, like he'll be like, Daddy's juice, and we're like, yes, that's right. It's not quite time for blessings, but yep, I do have juice of the adult variety. The we have he has a prayer, like a children's prayer book. It's not for him to read; it's for us to read and pray the prayers through over him, for him. He can learn them as he grows, but we have that next to his crib, so we can read him the prayers, and they're simple. It pulls from things like Psalms or little blessings, little promises that are found in places like Jeremiah, Ephesians, and just simple little one-sentence prayers that, by the time he's hopefully in the next year, 3 or so, maybe he'll remember some of them. And so we say those with him. He loves doing the Torah procession, so Catherine always goes and gets him and makes sure that he's in the line for processing the Torah on Shabbat.
And he usually carries his little...
He usually carries one of the little stuffed, the little plush Torahs, yeah. Matter of fact, I don't think he will do it unless he has his little plush Torah. So
it's become part of his...
It's become part of his ritual. So, mostly it's just keeping him involved, with us. He has his own little plush lulav and etrog set that he gets to hold and use during Sukkot, which will be coming up here in the next week or so. And
so beyond like prayer books, like you're using
right.
the children's prayer book or reading the Bible and liturgical things, what other, like, I don't know because I don't have small children anymore, but I know that we've advanced in availability of things. So I know now there's some movies out that are
right
that kind of lead. There's websites, coloring books. Things like that. Are those things that you guys use to...
There's a channel on YouTube we use called Listener Kids, and they play a lot of faith-based like kids songs, and like some of these are old songs, like songs that my grandparents would have grown up with, kind of faith songs. Some but they're not done as hymns as they would have been done back then. They're done actually like as these kind of upbeat little, very child engaging songs, and he loves those. So we'll listen to those when we're in the car. Matter of fact, when we listened, I know several of those songs by heart now because when we went to Charleston last summer, that was one of the only things he wanted to listen to the whole time were these little songs, and it's things like. I've decided I will follow. Of course, the song is I've decided to follow Jesus, but I've decided to follow Yeshua, Noah and the Ark, when the saints go marching in, those kinds of things. Things that a lot of older Americans would recognize as part of but they're done up in a new way, which is kind of fresh for a new generation.
So I know, for instance, VeggieTales, originally when they were earlier things, they had VeggieTales Passover, VeggieTales that are other VeggieTales Jonah, things like that. I also know that Becca Shea has the Scripture Snacks, which are little children's Bible songs
Yeah, I've heard good things about this.
Yeah, that some of our people love to play those with their children.
You have not heard of Becca Shea's thing?
Yeah,
and TLV has something for kids, right, on their, I think it's on their YouTube channel or something along those lines. I forget what it's called.
They also have the little board book, the Good Book, which I was given by one of the Greenbergs at Messiah Conference one year.
Right, and I know that Zaki Shapira has his Shuvu Kids, which is with the shark. I forget the name of the shark's name, but they deal with children's programs. So there are some resources that are out there now that are helpful for parents and going along with those kind of teachings and things in going on beyond. I know that TLV had Golden Apples curriculum for children, and there's other Shabbat school curriculum and things out there now. I know that there are more people writing books for children that are, simple readers for bedtime books and stuff that are coming out now, which is pretty exciting to see as the Messianic movement matures into the arts and things like that. It's pretty cool that those things are done. Do you guys, I know that some of the parents in our congregation during the service, their kids will color or draw things, and they have them draw, not just scribble on a page, but what are you hearing from this? And one of the things we learned, and this was from Rebbitzin Rosenberg, at one of the classes we had, is they actually gave the kids a paper and asked them to draw something or color something that goes along with the message, so they're listening to the message that's being in their whatever they're hearing, whatever they're receiving from it, they draw or do things for it. So do you guys do that with your kids? Do they have anything during service to connect them with what's going on in the adult service, but also letting them use different modalities to connect?
So at CMC we have, during the message is when our Shabbat school is. So we actually have our kids go out a little bit before the message for Shabbat school. They stay through the whole service, through the Torah service. Just after the Torah service, they are dismissed to Shabbat school. And in Shabbat school, they're doing activities and lessons that are based out of the Torah Parsha for the week. So they're learning at their level, graduatively learning at their level about the Parsha. And then when they're older and they're in the main service, it's already kind of a part of what they do on a regular basis. But aside from that, we actually still use the kids' bulletins. I don't know if you guys still use them or not. I think Catherine designed them years ago. So we still use those, and we give them out to the kids every week for when they come in for service, for them to color with or whatever as they go through the service. And they all love those. And then they go out for Shabbat school. But that is something that I know, Jake Rosenberg, Rabbi Jake Rosenberg in Chicago, that's something that he does. And he actually, because he is very artistic in general, he'll actually set a dry erase board up on the stage with them. And as he's talking, preaching, he's explaining to the kids, hey, while you're doing the, draw this and make it how you look. And this is what I would do it like. And it's really interactive, but it ties in with his message and so on. And so I think that's a really cool idea. I don't think it's something I would be good at personally, directing people how to do, but yeah, we do have the bulletins that has little activities and color pages that we give to them.
How's your drawing?
Mine? Yeah. Oh, I have no drawing. I have no artistic skills.
Yeah, I couldn't. I wouldn't ask Eli to do anything like that right now, because we're still in the stage where it's like we ate at Cracker Barrel a few days ago, and they give him the little sheet of paper with the crayons, and it was the most well done handful of blue and red lines I had ever seen, but that was it. There was we're not
no form, no shape,
no form, no shape, completely abstract, modern art masterpiece. It wouldn't work for me right now.
So I find this interesting to me, but I hope it's very interesting to those listening, especially the young parents who sometimes feel inadequate, sometimes feel like they can't do things, and what am I doing and how am I going to do? So I want to, as Rabbi Toby said, I want to give a couple of resources. One, to repeat the Word as a way of life, which helps you to follow through the Bible in a year several times. I want to encourage, if you haven't already got a Siddur for your home, to follow the simple Shabbat Siddur that we put together not only has the traditional prayers for Shabbat, but also has explanations. When your children say, why are we doing this? There's an explanation there. It also has prayer for children, for mothers, and for fathers in it, so you can bless one another. Because as Rabbi Toby said, it's so important for us, especially as we're raising our children or our wives. When you know you're going to be praying and blessing someone, it causes you to have a different mindset and heart set toward it. So those things... again, the Scripture Snacks by Becca Shea, those things, the Golden Apples and other literature, and you can look on Messianic Jewish resources.
Is it Messianic Liturgical Resources?
No, Messianic Jewish, MessianicJewish.com, I think is what it is, and find all kinds of children materials. Also, the TLV has the Children's Bible. What's it called again? You just mentioned the name of it.
Oh no! What I was mentioning was it's basically the gospel in like simplest form.
Right, but what's that called?
It's called the Good Book.
The Good Book that they've come out with. So there are resources within the movement that you can get your hands on.
Yeah, God's appointed times and God's appointed customs is something I think every new Messianic family is the first thing you should get. It's what helped my family when we went from the Baptist church into Messianic Judaism, or whether you're coming from the world into Messianic Judaism, it doesn't matter. But with those two books, you can navigate every single holiday from Shabbat to Yom Kippur to Sukkot. So I wanted to mention that as something it tells you what you need, what you do. And that's what we used. We had it. It was like literally on our kitchen table all the time.
Right. And for parents, it actually gives you the answers of why we're doing these things.
Right. Yes.
So when your children ask, you can answer.
And it gives you recipes for each of the holidays.
Right.
Yeah.
The Yom Kippur recipes are the best.
Yeah. Except for those are by Barney Kasdan.
Correct.
Yeah, Barney Kasdan's God's Appointed Times, which is the purple book. I think Customs is a little green book. And then I think that... And really, you can just grow from those two books. And I did have a siddur from my current congregation that I was going to. I was allowed to take a siddur home, but you can order a siddur offline, and siddurs can be exhaustive, but you're not expected to go through every bit of that. We would just do the Vashamru, the blessing over the husband and wife, the children, or I'd bless my mom if it was there, and blessing over the bread and wine. Literally, you can just start there.
Right, and that's why we did the simple Shabbat Siddur, because it has just the English. So if you don't know any Hebrew, you can just say prayers in English and follow along. If you can read English and there's transliteration, you can follow along. And it's just a Siddur for Erev Shabbat and for Havdalah, which are the home things. It's what you would do with your family to raise your children and to bless them, pray over them, pray with them. So the purpose of that was to make it very simple for any husband and wife, regardless of their Hebrew education, their experience. It just leads them through, and you can choose, I want to do this, or we want to just do the bread and wine, or we want to do the Vahavta and Shema, or we want to do these things with our kids together, and let it grow in you and with you as you go further.
Yeah, and I've been to a lot of different Shabbat meals at different people's houses, and it's all different. And I remember one particular I went to, and it was like 30 minutes before we ate because they were doing all these things, and that's fine. I think that's a beautiful thing as long as your heart's in it.
Yeah.
And I've been to some where it's just 3 or 4 blessings, and it was just as beautiful because the Spirit of God's present, Yeah. So don't get, I don't want to attack the idea of religion. Religion, and when I'm talking about religion, I'm talking about biblical religion. It's a beautiful thing. Religion is a beautiful thing. Ceremony is a beautiful thing.
Right.
But you can't make it like, man, if I'm not doing this or I'm not doing that, God's going to be upset. And I just don't think that's what.
I'm not even anti-organized religion, because we've tried that as a country for several years, and it so far has
I think that one of the biggest things, and I think you guys would agree, is consistency in what you're doing, not necessarily what prayers but that you're making the Shabbat important as you're doing it. And some weeks you may do more prayers, and some weeks you'll do less. But making the Shabbat, making time with your family and with God a centerpiece of your faith and of your family is I think the key. Not necessarily did we do every one of these prayers. Some weeks you may do more. And it's like I tell people at our synagogue, Shabbat dinner can be brisket, potatoes, green beans, salad, all the things, or it can be grilled cheese.
That's right, baby.
And tomato soup, because if you get so focused on having to do certain things that you lose the joy.
Right.
And it becomes a drudgery instead of doing something that's wonderful and unifying and enjoyable, then you've lost the meaning.
And that's the thing is, one of the main aspects, and there was a Messianic Jewish rabbi that was big on this too, one of the main aspects of kind of a Jewish, especially more of an Orthodox Jewish perspective, is on the Shabbat you should give God your best, which is why in more traditional Jewish communities, like, there's a massive table spread, there's a massive, like, you have the nice dishes out, everybody's dressed to the T's and what have you for Erev Shabbat dinner. But and while there's a beauty in that, and I get it, sometimes that just doesn't work, right? Sometimes your life is just too hectic, and just being able to stop right before Shabbat and do something simple to enter the Shabbat properly is as beneficial. Like for me, we don't do Erev Shabbat services at CMC.
Right.
Now we do Erev services for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, for Sukkot, things like that. But
Special
on
events.
Friday nights, generally speaking, we don't generally do Erev Shabbat services, because I've learned over the years that for most people, an Erev Shabbat service just makes things difficult, because you're getting off from your 9 to 5 and you're rushing home and changing clothes and trying to get cleaned up and trying to rush to get food and trying to rush to get out the door to get the family to synagogue. And by the time you get to synagogue, you're tired, you're worn out, you're broken down. You can't invest in the service. You can't whatever. And then aside from that, usually they start at about little kids' bedtimes. And so then little kids are train wrecks because they're not in bed, and everybody's looking at the parents like they're terrible parents because their kids aren't acting right.
Now your kid's just tired.
Yeah, while their routine's out of mess. And so for me, I've always viewed it that Erev Shabbat should be spent at home around the dinner table, relaxed, restful, because you're supposed to enter the Shabbat in peace so that you can actually rest. And so if somebody's rushing home from work to get to service, they're not entering the Shabbat peacefully or in rest. Right, yeah. And so having Erev Shabbat dinner at home is a beautiful thing. If that means you're doing it in your PJs and you've got paper plates with to-go pizza on the counter, but you were able to stop everything and just focus on the family and entering Shabbat peacefully, and you got a couple of prayers and light some candles, drink some kiddush, and eat, drink some wine and eat some challah, say the blessings over them. Real simple, real sweet, to the point. Sometimes those to the family can be far more meaningful than putting on the ritzes.
You said something earlier. I'm sorry to interrupt. No, you said something earlier where you said that Shabbat is about giving our best. Mm-hmm. But that's not our best food or our best clothes or our best dishes or it's our best us. And sometimes the way to give God our best is grilled cheese or tuna fish sandwiches or whatever is doable, so that you can enter the Shabbat in rest and in the right spirit, the right attitude. Sometimes it is a roast or a big meal. Yeah. But sometimes we get so caught up in the things that we lose the actual reason, which is entering into the Shabbat because it's a sacred space of time with Hashem, with God, and our family.
Yeah, and I'm not going to lie, for us, most of the time, we choose to use disposable dishes, disposable pots and pans, what have you, for Shabbat, because I don't ever want to get to a point that at the end of Shabbat, I regretted Shabbat because there's a pile of dishes that have to be cleaned now. That you can become, I don't know if anybody else has felt that way before, but you can become disenfranchised with things because of all of what piles up afterwards, right?
Right.
And so we'll use disposable dishes and stuff and limit how much is joy that we had on Shabbat, but rather we close out Shabbat with an excitement for the next Shabbat, not an excitement for, not a disdain or disgruntledness towards how much work has to go into next week again and what have you.
And the thing is to make sure that the love of God is woven into really everything you do for the Lord. Like, I mean, when you say the Aaronic blessing, that's all about the love of God. It's asking God to bless you and keep you and make His face shine on you and all these things. But the Shabbat is important as well, in doing the Shabbat dinner and things like that. Because, like you said, like Rabbi Eric said, you can have grilled cheese or you can have peanut butter and jelly sandwich for dinner. It's about the heart of the matter,
right? And
that's what, like, for instance, I watched a video earlier this year of this guy. He's got a YouTube channel where he goes all over the world and spends like time with all these different cultures, and he just experiences it. And he did one episode with an Orthodox family, and he did Shabbat dinner with them.
Yeah, I've seen this. Yeah.
Okay, so and it was a big to-do, and I get it. And there's nothing wrong with making it a big to-do. The problem was, by the end of the video, and this is someone who, I know the Lord, and I'm involved in Messianic Judaism, I'm involved in Judaism. And I was like, nothing from all that they did, though. God was eclipsed in so much of it. Like, he was like, yeah, they would say God and Lord. I'm like, but it was in such an abstract manner. Which I know that in some Jewish thought, it's like, well, God's too abstract to really relate to Him.
Right.
I've even heard some Orthodox Jewish people say, like, oh, well, we know that God is real, and we know that He created the world, and He intervenes, every now and then. I'm like, man, that is not what the Bible says about God at all.
Right.
But that's my thing. So if my son asked me, at the dinner table, or say we had friends over and their kid says, why do you guys do this? I would simply say, well, God made the creation in 7 days, over 7 days. 6 days He created everything, and on the seventh He rested. And for us, what that means is 6 days we work and we go about our lives, but God asked for 24 hours to be devoted to Him because He loves us. He knows we're busy. He knows life can be crazy. He knows life can be really tough sometimes, and we're just distracted and kind of, worrying about things. He's asking for 24 hours of attention.
To commemorate the author of creation.
See, that's the thing. It's like, how are you couching God to your children? that He is, I said not too long ago in a message to the congregation, I said, does God want our obedience? Well, yes, of course, but God doesn't want our perception of Him to be, I want you to do everything I say. I think more important than that is a relationship. The Bible talks about God's unequivocal love for mankind, for people. And I think if that's not being communicated in like a Shabbat dinner, then you're missing it. It's not, you can't have God be subverted or circumvented because this is just what we do.
Right. It's kind of like I tell people going to Dad's house for dinner.
Right.
If Dad invites you, if your father invites you over for dinner, are you going to see Dad, or are you going to see the food, or to be with the food, or to have the food? If we get so caught up in the meal that we don't recognize that our time with Him is there, and that He wanted to spend time with us, and that He reserved this segment of time to be with His children, then we've lost the whole purpose of doing it.
And I want to say one last thing about the Shabbat that I think is really interesting, and I actually just recalculated it to make sure. But nonetheless, we all believe in the value of keeping Shabbat and how important it is. We also all believe and congregationally teach the value of tithing and such, giving that tithe to the Lord out of the resources that He gives us and so on. But what I think is really interesting is if you do the math, the Shabbat is about 16.8 hours a week, is about 10% of the total week. And the Shabbat is a 24-hour period. So when you take that 24-hour period, subtract 16.8 hours, which would in essence be a tithe of the time you have in a single week, subtract that 6.8 hours, you basically have a little less than 8 hours, 7.2 hours, a little less than 8 hours left over. generally speaking, most people sleep for about 6 to 8 hours. So when you factor a full 24-hour period set aside for God, you factor out the 6 to 8 hours that most people sleep on average. That means time you have to spend with God on the Shabbat is actually a tithe, the 10% of your total time available to you in 1 week of 24-hour periods. And I just think that's really interesting that's laid out that way. And I don't know how many people really think about it like that, but it's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah. I think it's important, too, to remember that you are, when you begin to do things like keeping Shabbat, or when you're impressing upon your children the Messianic life, part of the Messianic faith and the vision is that the gospel goes to the nations. God goes to the nations and invites the nations to partake, invites the nations to come and be a part. So that means that, if you didn't grow up in a Jewish community and you don't live in a Jewish community, your Shabbats aren't necessarily going to look like the Orthodox communities. They've been doing this for hundreds of years, a certain way, with certain clothing and certain dishes, and it looks a certain way and has been a certain way, and their great grandparents did it that way. You can't match, just in sake of time, you can't match that. If you're first generation, Billy Bob Anglo-Scotch Appalachian, redneck, you just cannot jump in on that, and so your Shabbat dinner may look a little different, and that's okay. The gospel came to you. God invited you to partake and to join in. There are certain things that will be similar, but it doesn't mean you're going to be in all black with the fine china.
Yeah, that's such a bad mindset too.
Absolutely,
which is just this whole idea of, hey, watch what we do, just watch this, and not. I would think your hope would be that they would walk away feeling like they could have access to that they want to know this God that you're blessing.
Which is why I love groups like Road to Jerusalem, because they bring it to people as the people are.
Now, I want to say there is one thing we can definitely take away from the Orthodox community about, like, for instance, Erev Shabbat dinner, and that is the joy and the passion that they have for worshiping God in that setting. Because, we do Erev Shabbat dinner, and typically speaking, we're including eating, we're done in an hour and a half, 2 hours max. Leave some time to schmooze and whatever. But when you are participating in a Erev Shabbat dinner with an Orthodox community, more often than not, it goes late into the night. And when they're singing prayers, they're smacking the table and they're clapping their hands. They'll get up and dance. There's a joy and an excitement that goes into it. And I think for a lot of Messianic people, the way we do Shabbat in general is like, okay, this is something we have to do, so we're going to get it out the way, rather than going into it with joy and excitement and kind of reveling in the reality that we get to spend that time with God. And I think we just need to stop looking at it as a chore and start looking at it as all of these things are a beautiful component that we get to participate with.
Right. And to bring it back to our topic about children and raising them and being involved, how our children perceive our involvement in these things is going to affect how they enter in, or even if they do enter into those things. If they don't see Shabbat as something we joyously welcome and enter into and participate in, they're going to see it as a drudgery and something they don't want to do when they have their children and be a part of. So anyhow, I hope this discussion's been a blessing, and if it has, I hope you'll share it with others. And if you have a tradition or something that you do with your children to help them enter into the faith or pass Lador Vador, generation to generation, put it on whatever comments you're listening to this on so that we can see it and maybe share some more about it in an upcoming episode. Thank you, and shalom.
Thank you for listening to the MessianTics Podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to follow and interact with us on social media at MessianTics Podcast.